Hi everybody, welcome to Edonics. This is Kaushik. I'm your instructor for the Spring Framework training. In today's section 5, we will be talking about AOP, one of the core concepts of Spring Framework. So, what is AOP? AOP is nothing but aspect-oriented programming supported by the Spring Framework. So before we go in depth analysis and discussion of AOP, let's have a look at what we are trying to cover in this section. The first is AOP Overview, where we will be describing some insights on AOP. Then we will discuss the most important point, why AOP. Do we at all require AOP, or it can be bypassed in modern programming? Then we'll be talking about AOP core concepts, which we must know before we implement it efficiently in our programming. Then we'll be talking about on the implementation side, like AOP advices. In the next section, we'll be talking about how we can implement AOP programmatically. And as usual, on the last section, we have some QA, where we talk about different questions to judge your understanding, what you have learned throughout the section. Now let's start with AOP overview. So AOP is nothing but a different programming paradigm similar to object-oriented programming. You must remember one point, that it's not specific to Spring Framework. Spring supports AOP. Spring supports different components, different framework structure to implement aspect-oriented programming. But AOP can be implemented by other frameworks as well. So you should have very clear understanding about AOP, which is a different approach to solve programming, different approach to do programming, just like object-oriented programming. In object-oriented programming, we have objects at the center of everything. We concentrate on that. Similarly, in case of AOP, the aspects are at the center of everything. We must understand that we should have aspects specific to different areas where we concentrate. So AOP is about stuff which is called concerns, cross-cutting concerns, different aspects. And these concerns are basically, it cuts all the layers of the application. These concerns can be user-defined, reusable across different applications, and it can be used in different parts of the application. So similarly, the similar way as you do object-oriented programming, in a similar way we do aspect-oriented programming, where aspects are at the center of everything. Now let's check why AOP. Is it at all required for our application development? So before we talk about AOP, or we analyze why we need AOP, let's take a simple example like logging. It's a very common aspect or feature which we need to implement in every programming at every layer. Like auditing, it's another aspect which you need to implement everywhere in the programming. The security layer, the data validation. So all these things are very common in all the applications. But just try to understand whether these things are actually part of our business logic. No, these are not a part of our business logic. So why should we embed these things in application code? Why should we make these things tightly coupled with our programming? That's not a wise idea. That's where AOP comes into picture. AOP separates these concerns, these reusable functionalities or features which are common to all layers of an application, and then it gives us the flexibility to inject those aspects or concerns whenever and wherever we need. So it's an alternative approach to software programming compared to traditional programming. Aspects are nothing but the common concerns like logging, auditing, security, data validation, or maybe some other custom functions specific to any programming or application, that we separate from the application logic and make it a separate entity altogether, and we just inject it or plug it into the places where we need to use this thing. So these aspects contain functions or procedures that software developers can use in any part of the program. These concerns or aspects reduce unnecessary development overhead by using custom defined modules. Because just think, if you want to embed the logging code everywhere, if you want to embed the security code or the exception code everywhere in the programming, how much extra or additional development or coding you need to do. So that's not the purpose of a development. That's not the way we should develop. So to avoid that, Spring provides the framework called AOP. It provides the supporting infrastructures, supporting components at application level so that we can implement it by doing configuration or by using annotations. So that's where the AOP concepts come into picture. But as I have said earlier also, it's not only Spring which can implement AOP, it can be implemented by any framework provided they have the components ready. They have the components to support the aspects, to support the plugin of the aspects on runtime whenever and wherever required. Now, before we go into the implementation and other things, let's have a look at the core concepts of AOP. We will have some points. You just need to understand these points clearly to implement it. First, we'll talk about aspect. In simple terms, an example, logging is an aspect, security is an aspect, auditing is an aspect. So all these things are named as aspects or concerns, or rather more efficiently or more meaningfully, these are cross-cutting concerns. What does you mean by cross-cutting? Means it cuts all the layers of the application. For example, if in a ticket booking application, it could be on the ticket booking layer, it could be in the cancellation layer, it could be in the payments layer, it could be in the data validation layer. So a common concern, common aspect, logging is injected into all the layers of the application. So that is called an aspect. Aspect is nothing but the common functionalities that cuts all points, all modules of an application. Now, what is a join point? A join point is nothing but the points where we need to inject those applications, those concerns, or those aspects. This is the place in software application where an action or step will be taken by using AOP framework. Now, what is advice? Advice is nothing but the actual code that will be executed within the methods. Actually, it is the piece of code invoked during the program execution. So we have specific methods. We can embed them with annotation. We can embed them with XML configuration to specify what code needs to be executed before a method call, after a method call, or before and after the method call, or if there is an exception, this particular method will be called. So advice is at the core of AOP, where the actual code executes. For example, the logging. If we want to start logging before a method execution, then we need to put a before advice method and put the logging code inside that. Then we need to put the method, the target method or the target object before which the advice or the logging should start. And we should also implement after advice, and that should be injected when the method execution is completed. Now the point cut. Point cut is nothing but more related to join points. Point cut is actually the place in the code where an advice should be executed. Like in a configuration or annotation based programming, you need to specify where the advice will be executed, before the method call after the method call or before and after the method call. So it pinpoints the execution point of any advice when a target method is executed. Introduction is nothing but it allows you to add classes or methods to existing classes. And the target object, as the name suggests, it's the object that is advised by one or more aspects. It has nothing to do with the other things or other concepts of AOP, but it is actually the object before which the advice are executed. So there are some other terms also, like weaving. Weaving means you are linking the aspects with the method execution, but those are not the core concepts. There may be some other terminologies, but following points are the core concepts. You should concentrate on the term aspect, the term as advice, the term point cloud, which you need to understand, which you need to implement, because aspect is the concerns or the common features. Advice is the actual code to be executed. Point cloud is the point where this particular method or the plugin will be injected. Now let's check about the different type of advices. The advices, as I said, is at the core of AOP, where the actual code executes. For example, the logging code, for example, the auditing code, for example, the data validation code, or whatever code you need to implement or you want to execute at any point of your application, that should be put into the advices. It is a piece of code invoked during the program execution. Sometimes it calls concerns, sometimes it calls the aspects, but in simple terms, it is nothing but the code that you want to execute before a method execution or after a method execution, or maybe during a method execution, or if the method execution where there is some exception. That's why I have written that advice is considered the core of the AOP approach. So let's just have a brief look at different type of advices. There is a advice called before. It means this particular advice or this particular piece of code will be executed before the target method is executed. Similarly, the after advice is another type of advice where the method code or where the advice code will be executed once the method execution is complete. So all the advice codes or advice execution is surrounded by a method. Whether it should be called before the method execution, after the method execution, that depends upon the type of advice that you choose or that you configure in the Spring XML file. After returning advice is something which is executed when the application returns successfully. Around advice is something which will be called before and after advice code. And after throwing, as the name suggests, this is a particular type of advice code that will be executed when there is an exception. If there is an exception, this particular code will be executed. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 type of advices are at the core of Spring AOP implementation. You need to understand that all these advices are designed in a way so that it covers all things, all places of a method, where we generally embed these cascading concerns or the features. Now the AOP implementation side. There are two ways we can implement AOP. One is the annotation based and the other is the XML based. Aspect annotations are commonly used in Spring to implement AOP, as I have suggested. This is the particular thing which you need to understand. And there is the XML based annotation where you just write the Spring framework annotations, advices, bindings, weavings, everything within the XML. And on the annotation based, you write the advice before after on the code itself. So these two are the basic ways of implementing annotations. In our example, we will understand it more efficiently, more effectively. how it works, and hopefully your understanding will be more clear.